Thank you, Niamh. Thank you, Mayor Moran. Thank you, Minister Donovan, for your kind words. I particularly like to thank the Minister for his significant input right there on what might be contained in a forthcoming strategic plan. So we've got two learning opportunities, one in emergency plumbing and the other perhaps the more formidable one of articulating a political voice from an institution of this type. So thank you. Thank you also to the physio who ensured I could make it up the stairs without any significant pain, a small accident last week. And thanks also to the barber who ensured that it is necessary as opposed to being appropriate that I wear this hat while I'm standing here this evening. I want to give a huge thanks to our musicians. That's a really difficult act to follow. The Minister is one. I never like having to say anything after he has the stage. But the musicians, just to remind people, that was an original composition. I mean, that's a really significant achievement in what was a very short time. I did approach their maestro, Professor Gwen Moore, only a few weeks ago when I was being pressed around, well, what music do you want? And I said, I don't really know, I don't know. Give me a day to think, and the next day, what music do you want? So I thought, well, students, we've plenty of them, and they're brilliant. And we've brilliant musicians, so maybe they can come up with something. And that's what they come up with. So I think a huge round of applause for what they put together. I want to share in any download receipts that might come with that tune. Delighted also to welcome all of my colleagues and friends to Mary Immaculate College this afternoon. Everyone is here, particularly those who have travelled from overseas, and I met them on the way in. It's a real honour and a privilege to have people come that far to be here. It is 369 days since I walked off an Airbus A380 in Dublin Airport to take up the role as the 11th President of Mary Immaculate College. November 7th, I landed. It was a Thursday, it was cloudy, it was Dublin, it was cold, and I was a bit alone. 369 days. I'm going to call that a year. There are other presidents, of course, who would make bolder calls, but I think that's significantly bold enough. 1 year, long enough to lose an Irish version of an Australian suntan, yet not long enough to acquire an Australian version of an Irish accent. Long enough to miss loved ones who could not travel with me, yet not long enough to overcome the loss of family and friends who have long since left all of us. Long enough to regard Mary Immaculate College and the remarkable dedication of colleagues across every corner of this institution with the privileged vantage point of fresh eyes. Yet not so long that I've forgotten what it means to be new, to be uncertain, and to be a learner. As I gathered my thoughts to draft this inaugural address, the contents of a letter written in 1914 loomed large on my mind. In that dispatch, the modernist poet Ezra Pound advised his correspondent that it took him 10 years to learn his art and a further 5 to unlearn it. Now, philosophers have often had cause to reflect on what Pound may have meant by the verb to learn, but for a dynamic, a distinctive, and a deeply engaged college, the more potent and the more provocative term is that which relates to unlearning. Unlearning is the second act of education, one we resist far more than we realize. Having spent years, perhaps decades, perfecting the first act, the accumulation of knowledge, the forging of expertise, the confirmation of credentials, we become very skilled at addition, but unskilled at subtraction, of letting go of that which may no longer serve. Where learning cultivates mastery, unlearning encourages reflexivity. Where learning builds confidence in what we know, unlearning acknowledges the provisional nature of all knowledge. Pound's comments serve not as a metaphor, but as a method, because this address is not about the first act of education. It's not about prophesying excellence, though everyone, of course, wishes that. It's not about promising world-leading research, though everyone, of course, pledges that. It's not about unveiling pillars or priorities, though everyone structures around these. It's not about better strategic planning tools, refined implementation process, or optimized metrics. It's about the harder education. It's about asking questions that help us discover what we should become, not refine what we already are. It's about doing better things rather than merely doing things better. In fact, it's about a very particular kind of courage that is found in a very particular kind of person, Catherine Macaulay. When she founded the Sisters of Mercy, as Minister Donovan noted early on in 1831, which is just shy of 194 years ago, Catherine Macaulay had already made what appeared to be her most courageous decision, using her inheritance to purchase property at the corner of Lower Baggot Street in Dublin and constructing there a house of mercy. That building housed a school for young girls mired in poverty, a shelter for homeless women, and various workshops that provided vocational training in needlework and domestic skills, competencies and capabilities that might prepare young women for employment rather than the perpetuation of dependence. Such charitable generosity, however, neither captures nor fully defines her courage. That lay in her stubborn refusal to accept that merely helping the unfortunate was enough. It lay in her categorical rejection of what others took for granted, that better was good enough. It is here that our courage manifests itself, not in asking, how do we help better, but in questioning, why is it that help is needed at all? This is the kind of question that refuses to accept current structures as inevitable, the kind of question that generates possibility, the kind of question that opens space for imagination rather than foreclosing it. Where others would witness destitution and ask, what can we give? Catherine Macaulay would ask, what have we taken? Where others consoled themselves with handouts to the deserving poor, she created pathways to economic independence and systems that could transform social relations. Her instrument was education. Not education as the transmission of knowledge, not education as kindness extended to the unfortunate, but education as recognition of human potential and the demand for justice. Education as the building of relationships that can overcome marginalization, that can dissolve barriers, and that can create the conditions for human flourishing. Education as the instrument through which people could come to know themselves and their world differently. This is why her sisters became known as the walking nuns, refusing the cloister and refuting the model of holiness as a withdrawal from the world. They moved out and into Limerick's most disadvantaged communities, into grinding poverty and systematic exclusion. This wasn't simply relocation, it was an attempt at transformation. It was also an acceptance of responsibility. It's not enough simply to observe the world. One must help to form it, to reimagine it, through action, through encounter, and through relationship. Relationship, the most fragile yet the most powerful of social instruments. Relationship, an affirmation that all real living is meeting. And these relationships would create recognition where there was previously invisibility, solidarity where there was isolation, and mutual dignity where there was hierarchy. These relationships would generate intellectual growth, emotional resilience, and social transformation. And they would do these things simultaneously. Catherine Macaulay's courage, then, is moral courage, but it's also epistemic courage, the courage to challenge unjust beliefs, the determination to correct the mistake of not believing what we should, the strength to act on those beliefs when it served even her discomfort rather than convenience. So the question that Catherine Macaulay gives rise to is this: what does courage mean for a modern university-level college, an institution whose very existence is predicated on the provision of education? It means recovering what Macaulay understood instinctively, that universities exist to move toward margins, not away from them. Social margins, certainly, those excluded by poverty, by circumstance, by systemic barriers to access, but intellectual margins also. The questions we haven't asked, the frameworks we haven't interrogated, the ways of knowing we haven't acknowledged. The margin is where transformation begins, not where it ends. Macaulay's work set something in motion, not a fixed model to be replicated, but a momentum to be sustained. And I want to offer a little bit of precision on that word, momentum. Pillars are static, structural, load-bearing, and fundamentally necessary, but they are also fixed. Momentum is dynamic, directional, gathering energy from the past to propel us forward. Momentum is what makes questioning, transformation, and movement towards margins possible. And this momentum has animated Mary Immaculate College since its establishment in 1898. The founding purpose was clear: to prepare teachers who would serve communities systematically excluded from quality education. The mission was always distinct. Education must prepare not just workers, but citizens. It must focus not on the future of work, but on a working future. Education must produce not simply technicians, but critical thinkers capable of building a more just society. This is the momentum we have sustained, and the evidence surrounds all of us. We've grown not only in size, but in purpose, expanding our mission to include initial teacher education at both primary and post-primary levels, and broadening our academic offerings to encompass early childhood education, psychology, and vibrant liberal arts programs featuring disciplines like media studies, drama, history, modern languages, philosophy, and more. Since 1991, our student body has grown from less than 300 to now over 5,000, growth that reflects demand, but also the necessity of response. We've built collaborations that matter, locally through initiatives like City Connects, TED, EdNip, regionally with various education and training boards, nationally through policy engagement, and internationally through staff and student mobility with some of the most prestigious institutions in the world. We have transformed from a teaching-only institution to one where research achievement is recognized and rewarded, and at the highest levels. One where research also contributes to policy development. We awarded our first PhD in 2002, our 100th in 2015, and this year alone we celebrated the achievements of 31 doctoral graduates. None of this, of course, is mine to claim, but for all of us to celebrate. And I acknowledge with deep appreciation the vision and the efforts of my many predecessors, Sister Angela Butler, who is here this evening, the late Professor Patrick Kremen, the late Professor Michael Hayes, and Professor Eugene Wall, who I had the pleasure again of meeting before this event began. And also colleagues everywhere across this institution whose dedication has built what we now inherit. Indeed, their achievements, your achievements, the infrastructure, the programs, the reputation, they are hard won. But growth itself is not a strategy, and the structures that enabled past success may not be those that enable the type of transformation that is now necessary. In a sector still reeling from the effects of a pandemic and where uncertainty is the new norm, in a world marked by polarization and a growing aversion to difference, where and how does our courage now manifest itself? Are we willing and able to ask uncomfortable questions? Questions that genuinely challenge our assumptions? Do we narrow our intellectual horizons, or do we lean into the work of dialogue? Do we protect and proclaim what we already know, or remain open to transformation ourselves? Do we serve ourselves or the flourishing of others? Can we shift from asking, why are things the way they are, to how things might be? Courage at this time means embodying Catherine Macaulay's disposition, not replicating her solutions. And this is the work ahead. This is the work of an institution serious about remaining true to its founding commitments and serious about the futures that are worthy of them. And it is a task that begins with some honest acknowledgement. The traditional academic enterprise is profoundly solitary. From the independent scholar narrowing their field to pursue original research, to the single academic designing and delivering their own modules. The introvert nature of academic work is everywhere evident. And while this has generated disciplinary excellence, it has also entrenched a culture that values disciplinary excellence or expertise within silos, but which struggles to sustain debate across them or to articulate common purpose beyond them. Strategic planning has become ritual, a cyclical performance where we articulate visions, establish metrics, and then adjust when reality refuses to comply. We've mistaken the map for the territory, the plan for the practice. We inherited binaries that constrain how we think: research versus teaching, theory versus practice, individual achievement versus collective flourishing. These aren't natural categories. They're historical constructions. And they're increasingly at odds with the questions and complexities that our communities face. The same applies elsewhere. When we separate academic work from community engagement, we render it supplementary, not integral. When we distinguish theory from practice, both suffer. Theory without practice is abstraction. Practice without theory is repetition. We track publications, citations, graduation rates, satisfaction scores, but metrics quickly replace what they measure, and that measurement changes the behavior, disguising and undermining what we intended to assess and or advance. And then there is knowledge itself. Disciplines have produced remarkable advances, but also profound fragmentation. Problems don't arrive pre-disciplined. A child struggling in school does not have a psychology problem or a sociology problem. They have a life. Our structures resist integration precisely when we need it most. But what if knowledge is fundamentally relational rather than individual, emerging through encounter and the friction of different perspectives? What if knowledge and education are allowed to merge within and to nurture relationships? What if research was made accessible across the university community, students, staff, and our external partners? What if we recast research from the limited and the extraordinary to the ubiquitous and the accessible? From 19th century transmission models towards collaborative projects of sense-making? What if teaching were understood not as delivery, but as co-creation? Not content transfer, but shared discovery, where both teacher and student are transformed? And what if engagement were foundational rather than supplementary? What if it were conceived as partnership, where the boundary between university and community is permeable, and where the wisdom beyond our walls can shape the knowledge within them? These are not idle questions. They are directional ones. They point towards a different kind of institution, one ready to embrace these challenges, one ready to realize these possibilities. But what can enable the shift from vision to action? And the catalyst for this kind of effort, is not policy and it's not procedure, it's agency. It involves recapturing the original motivation that drew us to academic life in the first place. This is where courage is found. This is where courage is required. Not just the courage to act differently, but the courage to ask why we're doing what we're doing. Why do we structure programs this way? Why do we reward these activities and not others? Why is the question with the most potential. Why furnishes the greatest opportunity to examine and to energize. But we need other questions too. Who are we as educators, as scholars, as practitioners? Who are we in this work together? What do we value about our scholarship? Why do learners come to us? And what are the questions that they grapple with? What do we understand about the complex environments in which they live and work? It's questions of this type that enable new patterns of thinking, of learning, and of being. Questions that create space for dialogue before commitments that demand alignment, space for discovery before commitments that foreclose it, space for curiosity before commitments that declare certainty. But questions alone aren't enough. We need some form of responsibility, an ethical recognition that we are always and already implicated in that which we study, with whom we teach, and the communities that we serve. There is no view from nowhere, no neutral expertise standing outside the situations we seek to understand. Our methods shape what we see. Our questions determine what counts as answers. And this isn't relativism, it's reflexivity, intellectual honesty about the situated nature of knowledge production. It's courage to acknowledge our position, our assumptions, and our stake in the knowledge that we create. And that is why the strategic plan I'm about to discuss is not built on pillars, but on momentum. It represents interdependent themes that only make sense together. Themes emerging from questions, themes that invite co-construction, not compliance. So let me offer 3 orientations then that have emerged from the many conversations that have been had. 3 ways of attending that shape how we teach, how we research, and how we relate. The first comes under the heading of living care, common home. This first orientation recognizes that care is fundamentally interconnected. We cannot care for one another without caring for our communities. We cannot care for our communities without caring for the planet we share. These are not separate responsibilities. They are inseparable dimensions of what it means to be a human, to be in relation. When Pope Francis named Earth as our common home, he was articulating what should already be evident. We are embedded in systems we don't control, systems that sustain us, but systems that we degrade. Living care will mean examining how our practices, from procurement to pedagogy, research to facilities, employment to governance, sustain those relationships, not diminish them. It will require us to interrogate the language we inherit. Care must prioritize interdependence, not dominion. Sustainability, whether environmental, financial, or social, must challenge inequality, not produce it. This shapes how we understand our place, locally and globally. We are not external benefactors, but participants in shared life. Musicians from diverse traditions, historians confronting contested pasts, Irish language students revitalizing cultural practices, educators fostering inclusive learning. These are all necessary acts of co-creation. Cultural vitality, educational transformation, collective memory, they all require encounter across difference. Spiritual traditions, intercultural wisdom, diverse modes of knowing. These are not obstacles to overcome, but essential sources of wisdom. Living care extends to how we understand ourselves as an institution. As an employer, we must create working conditions that honor people, not exhaust them. Staff well-being is not peripheral, it is foundational. Our physical spaces, classrooms, studios, libraries, and the entire campus, they must enable creation, invite encounter, and impart joy. How we allocate resources, whom we employ, what we build, these are enactments of care, not refusals of it. And living care recognizes connection without dissolving distinction. Research retains its rigor, teaching its discipline, administration its necessity. What changes is the recognition that no activity stands alone. Each derives meaning from its own integrity and from its participation in relationships with one another, with communities, and those voices that imagine what can come next. Second orientation, children's voices, future worlds. This recognizes children and young people as present-day knowledge creators, not recipients of our wisdom. Citizens with rights now, not adults in waiting. This requires wrestling with different questions. What might children reveal about equity, about belonging and possibility that conventional frameworks often miss. How do the worlds we're creating now expand rather than foreclose what they could imagine for themselves? But voice alone is not sufficient. Children need space to form views and express them. They need audiences who can listen and influence over decisions that may well affect them. This means participatory research across education, psychology, history, language, theology, methodologies that begin with young people, not about them. It means staff resourced as agents who can notice, who can interpret, who can listen, and who can act. This orientation extends authentic partnership already underway while inviting disciplinary expansion. What emerges when we attend to how young people interpret heritage, express identity, frame their own mental health, create meaning through art? Giving every child the best possible start means addressing the structural conditions, housing, income, health, that shape what becomes possible. Because we hold ourselves accountable to intergenerational ethics, we must ask, will our choices expand worlds that children inherit or reproduce the inequalities they already perceive? The question isn't whether children direct every decision, but whether we're willing to be transformed by what genuine listening reveals. The third orientation, the third theme, human potential, humane technologies. This addresses how we foster human flourishing in an age of rapid technological transformation. Generative technologies don't merely automate tasks, they alter what human capabilities matter and why. Human potential isn't about competing with machines. It's about strengthening distinctively human capacities, ethical discernment, aesthetic sensibility, relational wisdom, and the ability to formulate questions worth pursuing. These are not supplementary to technical competence. They determine whether technical knowledge serves dignity or undermines it. And humane technology means designing tools for human flourishing, examining the values embedded in systems. When information proliferates instantly, but truth becomes contested, we must cultivate judgment. Which sources merit trust? What constitutes evidence? How do algorithms shape what we see? We name these technologies without being captured by them. We wrestle with them, interrogate them, question what they demand. This shapes how we approach digital literacy, information, integrity, media creation, along with the spaces, physical and virtual, where learning happens. Our research, our pedagogical choices, all must invite human encounter, not extract attention. This is not just a humanistic principle, it's an economic necessity. Regions thrive through adaptive creativity and ethical innovation, not technical execution alone. And these three orientations, these three thematic frames, provide a grammar for institutional life, not a blueprint. They enable coherent institutional action without predetermining all outcomes. They invite ongoing dialogue about what it means to be an educator, a researcher, a member of this learning community at this particular moment and beyond. They articulate a framework for collective sense-making that will help us navigate uncertainty together. This means co-construction becomes central to how we work. It means we'll discover our values through practice rather than declaring them in advance. Because where our values can be found matters far more than what we say they are. There is one significant and concrete symbol of this momentum that I want to mention, and others have done so already: the new library building. Libraries have always been far more than repositories of books. They're spaces where knowledge, community, and possibility converge. Our new library will embody and inspire the very principles I've described today. Spaces designed for collaboration and individual study, for digital and traditional scholarship, for learning that crosses boundaries rather than reinforcing them. It will be a building that invites questions about who learning environments are for, what they can be, and what they could achieve. With the new strategic plan, we are entering a form of second education, but we do it together. We're learning to ask different questions, to attend to voices at different margins, to refuse false choices, to unlearn what might limit us. It is momentum that opens up new possibilities for sustained transformation. Change shaped not by predetermined answers, but always by emergent questions. Change guided not by a fixed map, but by moral purpose. And this is uncomfortable work. It requires intellectual humility, the recognition that expertise does not immunize us from bias, that leadership doesn't mean having all the answers. It requires patience with processes that may feel messy, courage to ask, to risk the security of what we know for the possibility of what we could discover. But we do that because we believe that better is possible. It is that spirit, a willingness to unlearn in service of deeper learning, which remains our most vital inheritance, our most urgent responsibility, and our most necessary future. It's a task that requires a specific ethic and a matching ethos, one that ensures the way ahead remains one of optimism and one of opportunity. And as president, I am organisationally positioned at the head of such a task. However, I can neither be its patriarch nor its prophet, but I can be its standard bearer. In this role, I would always show the way. The path ahead will be determined by those who respond to the many invitations, who engage with the questions, who risk the discomfort of unlearning. I'll show up consistently, listen more than I speak, ask difficult questions, and even admit when I'm wrong. I will create space, not for monument parks or ballrooms, but for the kind of questioning that institutional life too often closes down. And this is a challenge that I relish, an opportunity I am honoured to embrace, and a task that I very much believe in. Why? Because it is work worth doing, and it is work that brings joy. So thank you very much.